This is the Intrinsic Report. Be informed, be inspired.
In the last episode, we traced the origins of the conflict between the Christians and the Jews. It goes all the way back to the moment the Jewish leaders rejected Jesus' messianic claims and went as far as to have him crucified. Then, when Jesus' followers inherited an empire, they passed the equivalent of apartheid legislation for the purpose of disenfranchising the Christ killers. When the Reformation era came, legal restrictions on the rights and freedoms of the Jews stayed in place, being one of the few mechanisms Catholics and Protestants agreed on. By the Enlightenment era, ecclesiastical attitudes towards the Jews morphed into pseudoscientific racism, whereby Jews were casted as the corruptors of the white race. In the end, the Nazi war against Jews was a culmination of the story that the church had been telling about the Jews for millennia. If you missed that episode and would like to get more details on the topic, I'll make sure to link it here for you. For this episode, I sought out to understand how the hostilities between the Muslims and the Jews kicked off. For the cursory reviewer, I could summarize this episode in 2 questions. What happens when grievances over wealth and equality harden into a religion? What happens when the derived religion justifies intolerance towards unbelievers? For the history buff with time on their hands, rather than to merely tell you what my answers to these questions are, I'd like to invite you along for the journey. This story begins in 6th century Arabia. A caravan of Arab merchants with loaded camels is returning to Mecca from Syria. They make a pit stop near Basra, where they encounter a religious man by the name Bahira. Bahira is a Christian hermit, and he takes a keen interest in the young boy, keeping an eye on the camels and the loads. He tells the boy's uncle to watch over him because when the Jews find out about his destiny, they would do him harm. That boy's name's Mohammad. He's from Mecca, a little town in the outer desert steppes along the west coast of Arabia. From ancient times, there had been a shrine for the local pantheon at Mecca where the nomads from many parts of Arabia come at a particular time each year to make pilgrimage. Muhammad's great-great-great-grandfather was the first to permanently settle there. His descendants established a thriving community that takes advantage of the growing commercial activities. Muhammad's clan, the Quraysh, control the caravan trade going through Mecca. Muhammad depends on the Quraysh for provision and protection, having been orphaned from an early age. He grows up with the disillusionment of having lowly status while coming from a noble clan. As he accompanies the caravan traders, he sees how Arabia had become entangled in the meshes of the politics of great powers of the day. The Abyssinians, Byzantine Greeks, and Sassanid Persians often wrangled for control in the Middle East, events disruptive to the caravan trade the Quraysh depended on. In this part of the world, religion is the language of diplomacy. Christians favored the Byzantines and Abyssinians, while the Jews, the Sassanids. By Muhammad's time, long-established Jewish and Christian communities have introduced the concept of monotheism to the region. Meccans, however, are polytheists. They are largely occupied with the material interests of merchants. The Quraysh nobles, believing their wealth and influence made them little gods, control Meccan commerce and politics as they please. The Quraysh also allied themselves with outsiders, namely the Jews, with whom they shared mutual economic interests. Meccan capitalism signaled a decline in tribal solidarity. Individualism had been eating away gradually at the social fabric as commerce grew. When Muhammad finally grows up, he will make attempts to address the social malaise. Unfortunately, he is only a lowly ranked clan member of the Quraysh. How could he work around it? At 43, Muhammad announces himself as a prophet, citing angelic visitations. He begins by preaching judgment upon the rich and the idols of the Kaaba, the Meccan shrine. He says prayers should be made facing toward Jerusalem instead, hoping to drive a wedge between the Jews and the Quraysh nobles. New ideas that the Quraysh nobility not only considered disruptive to the Meccan trade, but treacherous by one of their own. Muhammad's message attracts a diverse crowd of disgruntled young nobles, former slaves, and marginalized Arab clans. People just like him who did not feel represented in the mercantile politics of Mecca. This only invites public ridicule, social ostracism, and economic persecution when the Quraysh convene a council to address the perceived threat of the Mohammedans. The terms of the boycott are formalized in a written document which is hung in the Kaaba, symbolizing the collective agreement of the Quraysh tribes. No one's allowed to buy or sell goods to Muhammad, his family, and his followers for 3 years, leading to severe economic hardship. Obscurity, alienation, rejection, all familiar emotional wounds from his childhood. Muhammad's closest relatives shield him from the full impact of the fallout. But all that changes after he'd been heard saying that he feared the patriarchs of Mecca were in hell. Muhammad is now persona non grata in Mecca, having turned his back on his tribe, their ancestors, and their gods. Once looked down upon as an orphan, he is now rejected as a prophet. About 340 kilometers north of Mecca, there's an oasis called Yathrib. Although Jewish exiles first established themselves there, Arab presence has grown significantly. Tensions come to a head when a coalition of Arabs wrestle Yathrib out of Jewish control. After a great slaughter, hostilities come to an end, with the two sides exhausted. However, peace has yet to be made. During the summer pilgrimage that year, the leaders of Yathrib set out for Mecca. By this time, the Mohammedan movement has been largely discredited. The tribal leaders of Yathrib, however, seek out the estranged prophet, thinking that he might be able to help them overcome the difficulties which beset Yathrib. Muhammad makes the calculated decision to journey to Yathrib. They sneak out of Mecca in the dead of night. This is a fresh start for the Prophet. Yathrib will be remembered as Medina, meaning city of the Prophet. And although only a leader of the emigrants, Muhammad is welcomed as a peace arbiter among warring clans. He drafts a constitution which formalizes relationships between his followers, the dominant Arab clans, and the Jewish communities that same year. His influence grows significantly, not as a political figure, but as a unifying prophet. As an outsider, non-partisan religious leader, he is carving out an alliance that transcends clan ties, called the Ummah or Brotherhood. This early pan-Arabism is something unheard of in the desert steppes, as blood ties are what holds the social fabric. The Christian hermit that once so long ago took interest in him as a boy seems to have been right about Muhammad's special destiny. He'd also warned about the danger the Jews would put him in were they ever to find out about it, hadn't he? Barely a year after his arrival to Medina, Muhammad and the Jewish tribes are at loggerheads. The growing number of Muslim converts has shifted customer loyalty to the members of the Brotherhood, causing Jewish merchants to lose their long-held monopoly over Medina's trade. The loss of their oasis, coupled with a dwindling market share, further heightens the realization that the claims of Muhammad are incompatible with Judaism. If the people of the book aren't in support of him being one of the divine prophets, Muhammad is outed as a fraud. The Brotherhood, who he makes pray facing toward Jerusalem, would turn on him. The peace he helped mediate in Medina would not hold under the circumstances either, would it? More personally, Muhammad just couldn't risk losing face in Medina as he once had in Mecca. What was he gonna do about it? Well, having been part of the merchant caravans early in his childhood, Muhammad is equipped with a rare knowledge of the geopolitical scene of his day. He had first-hand knowledge of how the great powers Arabia was pressed between contended for their version of monotheism. Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Eastern Orthodox, and Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity had been debated long before the inception of Islam. Rather than reinvent the wheel, Muhammad reasserts the obvious charge against Pharisaic Judaism. The Talmud deviates from the earlier scriptural teachings. How then could those who corrupt sacred texts be in any position to judge them? From Muhammad's viewpoint, his movement has come too far just to have it all jeopardized by disagreeable Jews. What had initially begun as a religion of social equality, peace, and monotheistic worship begins to take a dark turn. Muhammad declares literary and intellectual attacks against him a mortal sin. This is the first warning shot against the people of the book. Invoking the Arabic desert culture of raiding one's enemies, Muhammad sanctions what would become known as Jihad. This is the second warning shot against the Jews, whose higher economic status, in spite of their fewer numbers, attracted envy. Muhammad also declares Mecca as the new religious center of Islam, effectively changing the direction in which the Brotherhood prays. This is the third warning shot. Muhammad was done courting the Jews' approval. The Jews of Medina must decide whether they are with him or against them. Muhammad's jihadist revelations not only align perfectly with Jewish opposition in Medina, but also with the news of a Meccan caravan returning with salesware from Gaza. There's still some unfinished business between Muhammad and his clansmen, one which Muhammad is now strong enough to take care of. The Brotherhood and the Meccan caravan clash at Badr. Surprisingly, the Brotherhood routs the Meccans, who outnumber them 3-1. Consequently, the victory is cast as further evidence of Muhammad's prophethood to the Brotherhood. It also puts into question the wisdom of the Meccan nobility who continue to reject them. The prospect of booty furthermore attracts to Medina poor nomads from the neighboring region to join the Brotherhood. Before long, even all the Arabs of Medina officially accept Islam. In just 2 years, Muhammad has gone from a social outcast and a refugee into a revered prophet who commanded an army. Not bad. Not bad at all. To further consolidate his hold on Medina, Muhammad begins expelling some of the Jewish tribes. Most flee northwards towards their homeland, while others to Medina. By the year following, the Quraysh and the Meccan leaders are planning a retaliatory attack on Medina. Their goal is to stop the Jihad on their trade caravans and rid Arabia of the menace of the Brotherhood and its prophet. Mecca and Medina clash in Uhud. Once again, the Brotherhood finds itself outnumbered. The Prophet's presence is, however, reassuring. The Meccans fight to preserve the status quo, the Brotherhood for the divine vindication of their cause. The Meccans nearly succeed in killing Muhammad. Even though they have fallen short of their initial aim, the Meccans hope it will be enough to dissuade the Brotherhood from carrying out jihad on their caravans. Meanwhile, in Medina, the Brotherhood is facing an existential crisis. Having failed to secure a decisive victory, even with the Prophet by their side, is unsettling. Muhammad must find a way to reassure them, or risk losing everything he's worked to build so far. As fate would have it, a significant betrayal is discovered and viewed as a direct threat to the Prophet. The Nadir, another Jewish clan, is reported to have plotted to assassinate Muhammad, raising immediate suspicion about their loyalty. Their actions could encourage an uprising against Muhammad during this vulnerable moment. The Nadir Jews earned the eventual expulsion from Medina. Once again, the Brotherhood confiscates more Jewish wealth and lands. The growing Jewish refugees around Mecca ally with the Quraysh, who are planning to launch yet another attack on Medina. Soon, and with the much needed help from the Jewish exiles, the Quraysh have built their biggest army yet. Previous battles have shown that the Brotherhood are likely to overcome their opponents in an infantry melee unless heavily outnumbered. This time the Quraysh have raised an army 7,000 strong and with a cavalry of about 1,000 horses. Muhammad gets word that the Meccan army have set out to lay siege on Medina and about the overwhelming size of their cavalry. The Meccans came close to a total victory when they last clashed at Uhud. That couldn't happen again. A Persian convert helps Muhammad come up with the plans to offset the undue advantage of the Meccan cavalry. The Brotherhood worked tirelessly for 6 days to dig a massive trench, 3 to 5 meters as deep as is wide, outside of Medina. The Meccans are wholly unprepared for this obstacle. This is either gonna force hand-to-hand combat or the Meccans to abandon their plans for taking Medina altogether. Either way, the odds are certainly much better than losing. Muhammad has eliminated the chance of the worst possible outcome against an overwhelming adversary. There's still a weakness in his plan though, the proverbial enemy within. Left inside of the city were another Jewish clan, the Qurayzah, who had taken a neutral stance rather than fight alongside the Brotherhood. As the battle lines freeze, The Meccans make offers to the Qurayzah with the hope of getting them to attack the Brotherhood from behind. A fortnight later, the support of the Qurayzah is still not forthcoming. Eventually, the Meccans are forced to retire in utter shame. Equally embittered by the cost of their fruitless expedition, the Meccans can no longer expect to raise another formidable army against the Brotherhood. Muhammad has not only averted the siege of Medina, but has brought Arabia's ruling class to its knees. He had always dreamt of this moment as a young orphan. Upon realizing that after the failure of the Meccans his position is very much stronger, Muhammad is not prepared to tolerate neutrality. Casting it as Medina's weakness, he and the Brotherhood fall upon the lands of the Qurayzah Jews. The Qurayzah do not fight back with much vigor. In the end, they offer terms of surrender, to be exiled without nothing, like the case with earlier Jewish expulsions. Their doing so only signs their fate. All the men of the Qurayzah are executed, and their women and children sold as slaves. Their wealth and lands are equally distributed among the Brotherhood. As word of material reward travels far and wide, the Brotherhood grows exponentially. The waves of exiled Jews taking refuge in Mecca stand in the way of Muhammad's desire to bring the city under his polity. Even though the Brotherhood has had the better of the Meccans before, Muhammad doesn't want to risk another conflict. It serves his interests much more were the Jews isolated. After all, experience has shown Jews don't put up much of a resistance. First, Muhammad commissions jihad against one of the Arab tribes, receiving bribes from the Jews in return for military help. The Brotherhood returns with 500 camels and 2,000 sheep, sending a clear message: it's dangerous to fraternize with the enemies of the Prophet. Then, Muhammad tightens the blockade on the caravan trade by forging alliances with the northern desert tribes. This makes it safer for caravans from Syria arriving to Medina than for those merely passing through on their way to Mecca. Next, Muhammad ensures any Meccan caravan attempting to get around the blockade is raided in jihad. Finally, if the economic pressure is sufficient, the Meccans should seek Muhammad out for a truce. At such a time, Muhammad would offer the Meccans terms so generous they could not refuse in return for what he truly desires. Things don't go exactly as Muhammad hopes. The Meccans are too proud to pursue a peace deal with him. It would make them look weak while enhancing the illusion of Muhammad's invincibility. Muhammad has a trick up his sleeves that could tip the scales. He announced that he would be leading the Brotherhood on the annual pilgrimage to Mecca that year. The Quraysh and other Meccan nobles understand it doesn't bode well for them if the Brotherhood is allowed in and out of Mecca peaceably. The tension the news creates forces things according to plan. The Quraysh clan elders are left with no choice but to initiate a meeting with Muhammad. Both parties meet at a neutral location outside of Mecca. Both sides agree to a non-aggression pact that freezes all hostilities for a decade. The amount of concessions Muhammad makes should have been considered too good to be true. The Meccans, too bedazzled by the prospect of finally resuming their caravan trade, do not give it a second thought. The Meccans had not only legitimized Muhammad's cause by accepting the temporary truce, they had effectively given him free rein for his military campaigns across Arabia. The first of the enemies to be crushed by the 6th week of the truce, you guessed it, are the merchant Jews of Khaybar. See, the Khaybar Jews had felt they owe a moral duty to avenge the persecution of their counterparts in Medina. Their material interests for the safety of their caravans notwithstanding, saw them aiding the Meccans during the siege of the Prophet's city. From Muhammad's viewpoint, the Meccans wouldn't have been as formidable as they were against his attempts to subdue them were it not for the wealth and the influence of the Jews. The enemy of my enemy alliance that once bound the Meccans to Jewish factions is now preempted by the blood oath between Muhammad and the Meccans. Utterly helpless, the Jews watch as the Brotherhood falls upon their women, wealth, and lands. From now henceforth, the policy towards the Jews of Arabia would be overtaxation, or worse, execution. They could criticize Muhammad as a false prophet all they wanted, but it would never again be from a position of strength. Within 2 years of the Pledge of Good Pleasure, both parties have violated the terms. Owing to the persistent internecine conflicts, the Meccans are more resolved to preserve the peace than to hold Muhammad accountable. Yet, when one of the Meccan clans retaliated against a clansman allied with the Brotherhood, Muhammad doesn't afford them the same courtesy. He secretly marshals an overwhelming army of 10,000. The sight of countless campfires stretching across the horizon just outside of Mecca is chilling, one that exposes the fractures within Mecca's upper society. Some of the leading Meccans scramble to flee the city, having concluded external help wouldn't be forthcoming. After all, the Jewish noble families, who Meccans often relied on, have long been weakened. The other Meccan leaders make their way to the encampment to formally submit to Muhammad. Muhammad advances on Mecca the next day, securing an effortless victory. Against the unsurmountable odds of the Meccan mercantile interests and Jewish religious orthodoxy, he had prevailed. The once disillusioned orphan had risen to become the undisputed champion of Arabia. In his memory, the Brotherhood vows to subdue the unbeliever who rejects his prophethood or die trying. That'll be all for this episode. If you'd like a copy of the slides used in this recording, use the QR code here. Signing off, I've been your host, Martin K, for the Intrinsic Report. Be informed, be inspired. Have a good one.